episode 219 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. We're going to be speaking to expert Bob Tiede, and he's going to tell you how you can lead with questions and not answers. That's right, folks. It's all about asking the right questions today. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it. Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, welcome one, welcome all. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy. It's so great to have you here today and following along this journey of becoming a better leader, because you know what? As my intro states, I have over 20 years, actually coming up on 21 years almost to the day of military leadership experience, but I'm still learning. I, like you, am still learning, and I, like you, still have that passion and drive to learn more, to be better, to be the best leader possible for our people. And that's why you're here, and it's so great to have you here with me today. But before we dive in, you know what also would help you in your journey? That's a community of leaders, because as leader Colin Powell once stated, the top is lonely. And what Colin means is that as a leader, you're the one that has to deal with the consequences of your decisions. You're the one that has to make the decision. You're the one that has to decide between, organizational effectiveness, your personnel, how to balance your money, and all kinds of other situations. But I'm telling you, it doesn't have to be so lonely. There's a community out there for you and waiting for you, and that is the Leader Growth Mastermind, where we as leaders get together and discuss the hard topics, such as leading others of different ethnic backgrounds and different cultures, how to lead different generations, how to handle conflicts, how we as leaders can increase our own productivity, which is what's coming up next, how to make better decisions, and so on and so forth. I think you get the point. We go through content every week around the three domains of leadership. Each month we focus on a specific domain. So the month of June, we'll be focusing on leading ourselves. We also meet once a week to discuss these issues face-to-face via video teleconferencing. If this sounds right to you, if this sounds like that's something you're looking for, that you need in your life, we are here for you. And you can check us out at movingforwardleadership.com/mastermind. Again, movingforwardleadership.com/mastermind. And that is going to take you to our community landing page where you can apply to become a member. Again, movingforwardleadership.com/mastermind. All right, let's talk a bit about Bob and how to lead with questions today. And that is that I've said a number of times on the show here, we are no longer in the age where leaders are expected to know everything, to have all the right answers, to be the ones to make the decisions not based off of seeking information, but rather having the information. We are now in that latter part, i.e., seeking information, asking the right questions. And let me tell you, I'm literally just back from my work day and recording this podcast episode for you. And I asked a lot more questions today than I gave answers to. Why? Because I'm unlocking the information from my team so that they can inform me, that I can go ahead and push that information forward and decisions can be made that way. You see, that is leadership today. And I'm not saying patting my back, but you'll hear it from Bob himself. Bob is an accomplished leader, expert, author, blogger. He served on a leadership team of crew for 50 years. He's wrote in a number of books. And basically, he has focused his life on this topic of how we can be better leaders. And one interesting thing that came out of today's episode is that one of the references Bob pulls out was a guest that I almost had on the show. And I actually correct Bob at one point about a part that he references in that author's book. I'm going to leave it there for you. You'll hear about it near the end of the show. But yeah, it was pretty interesting, pretty cool to be on the exact same page as Bob as we go through that interview. In the interview, we talked about how he came up with this idea of learning with questions, why leading questions is actually more effective, how to ask effective questions of team members, and so much more. You're going to enjoy this show. Bob is a wealth of knowledge, and it was great to have him here on the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's enough for me. Why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation about how to lead with questions with Bob Tiede. Bob, sir, welcome to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. So good to have you here.
Scott, it's my pleasure.
So we're talking today about how to lead with questions, which is awesome because I talk about it so much, especially with my mastermind students, how us as leaders this day and age, it's no longer about having the answers. You know, before people look to leaders about having all the answers. Oh, let's go see the boss. He's got all the answers, or she's got all the answers. They'll tell us what to do, et cetera, et cetera. But now, the world is so diverse. It's so, you need to be a specialist, but you can't be a specialist in everything. You have to be a specialist in a very niche area. And as us as leaders, you can't be an expert in 50 million different facets. You kind of can be an expert in your overall generality, but at the same time, you can't be an expert in, deep in everything. So that is what I've been talking about. We need to lead with questions. So from your standpoint, I'd love to hear how you came about with this, because that's how I've come about with this.
Well, Scott, you're going to hear that I'm a slow learner. For most of my career, looking back, I was a benevolent dictator. And not out of evil intent, but my only paradigm of leadership is that a leader needs to tell staff what to do. A leader needs to give direction. Now, I did say benevolent. I grew up in a home where I was taught to say please and thank you. So, Scott, had you been on my team, I probably would have never said, hey, Scott, go do this. It would have been more like, hey, Scott, this week, here's what we're working on. It'd really be great if you could please do this. And when you did it, I said, Scott, thank you at a staff meeting. Scott, you stand up. You all need to hear what Scott did. But at its core, my only paradigm of leadership was a leader needs to tell. That all changed for me in 2006 when I discovered a book called Leading with Questions by Dr. Michael Marquardt, professor at George Washington University. And his book, it was a page turner for me. It was filled with stories literally of leaders from around the globe sharing both their stories and the questions they were using to lead. And as I read that book, I had another question. Why hasn't anyone ever shared this paradigm with me before? I embraced it. And I mean, did I ever? Today, just recently, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of my blog, leadingwithquestions.com. But Scott, I always like to start with this story. It's really kind of a confession of being a benevolent dictator. Because I think when people hear, well, Bob has a blog, leadingwithquestions.com, Bob's written books on leading with questions, they could think, oh, I bet that just comes naturally to Bob. And I share, no, no, no. What comes naturally to Bob is to be a teller, not an asker. But I moved from telling to asking because I saw how much more effective it would be. And if Bob can move from being a teller to asker, well, so can any one of your listeners.
I love that story. Yeah, dictator. You know, it's not uncommon. It's super not uncommon. And here you're hearing from the by day Canadian Army officer. So, you know, that is kind of what people stereotype us with is, you know, dictator orders. You will do this, blah blah. You shall do this now. You know, you will jump how high, for how long. You know, at the pace I tell you without any
Yeah.
questions. And what I'll say, actually, I was having you know, conversation with one of the guys today, and we were discussing that, and you know, there's time and place for that, but there's also time and place to exercise other leadership styles, right? And leading with questions is definitely a part of a leadership style. So, I guess the next question, you said that it was more effective. So, why is it that it's more effective than being that directive leadership style leader? Because to me,
Yeah.
you know, you say, you know, you tell your people what to do, how to do it, you're going to get the results you want, right? Isn't that how it works?
Well, we think so when we're the leader. um, but Scott, you said something a minute ago, and that is a leader who thinks they need to have all the answers. None of us have all the answers, but if you think you are to have all the answers, wow, that is a heavy burden on the shoulders of any leader to think I need to have all the answers. And Scott, I'm guessing you've never done this, but I know when I was a benevolent dictator, there were times when I was asked a question and I didn't know the answer. I made one up because I thought leaders need to have all the answers. And one of the things I have now is leadership is not as much about having answers as it is about having some of the questions. And so, just for example, one of my staff comes to me today and asks a question, and I have no clue what the answer is. I no longer have to make one up. I can say, Scott, that's a terrific question. How would you answer it? And Scott may say, well, Bob, that's why I came to you. Well, Scott, that is a terrific. I don't know the answer. Who do you think might know? Or how could we find out the answer to that question? And generally, my staff will say, well, they'll have an idea on how to answer. Often they have an answer, or they'll have an idea on how we can find the answer. And I'll say, well, Scott, could you go do that research and come back? Because I want to know that answer as much as you. So, kind of with that approach, Scott, I'm actually now prepared for any question that comes my way. I no longer have to have the burden of answering them all.
No, I definitely agree with that. And it makes a lot of sense to me. So, a bit about my background. At one point, I commanded a logistics squadron of 200 members, and there were three distinct, what we refer to as troops in there. One was a transport troop, one was maintenance troop, one was a supply troop. And those are very diverse troops. Like in combination of those three troops, there are 13 different occupations. You know, occupations people spent years upon years of training. And here I was, you know, in charge of those 13 occupations that were grouped into three different troops. You know, it's impossible for me to have all the answers. I can't
Yeah.
know what they do from a day to day, you know, how to do their jobs, every single one of them. So it's impossible to have all the answers. So that's why it really speaks to me about this whole questions and leading with questions. Now, one of the things that I often hear is when someone comes to you with a question and you don't know the answer, Use the default response. I don't know, but I'm going to get back to you. And to me, that was for a while, I was like, okay, that's a good way to do it. But now I don't agree with it so much. I'd love to hear your standpoint with it.
Well, I have a friend that gives that a word picture. And that word picture is your staff comes with a monkey. The question is a monkey. And they want to unload the monkey and put it on your back. So when you say, well, I don't know the answer, but let me think about it or get back to you, they walk away, no monkey on their back, the monkey's on your back. If you're not careful, you can have a whole room full of monkeys. And so one of my friends said, in leadership, you want to make sure when they bring you a monkey that they take the monkey back with them. In other words, ask them to go do the research to find the answer to the question you don't have the answer to. And so I agree with you that, and again, there are times, I mean, there is no like in all cases do it this way. Um, Earlier, like you said, leading with questions. Well, I do it this way. I share a lot of times that most of us, we actually need both. There are times as a leader we need to tell. In an emergency situation, we want somebody to say, gentlemen, men and women, here's what you need to do now. We need tellers. And at the same time, we need to lead by telling, we need to lead by asking. And I ask audiences, well, which one is better, telling or asking? And so many times they raise their hand, oh, asking is better. And I say, well, that was a trick question. When you fly, which wing of the airplane is most important, the right wing or the left wing? It's like, we need them both. They better be perfect. And I say, the truth is, most of us, if we imagine our right arm to be our telling arm, it's well developed. If we imagine our left arm to be our asking arm, it's not quite as well developed. And so the goal is to strengthen the asking arm so you could have equal strength. Tell when you need to tell, ask when that would be more effective. And, you asked earlier, why is it more effective? Scott, let me ask you a really silly question, but it's a setup question for the second question. Let's say you have a team of 10, you and 9 others, and you have a rowboat and you want to get that rowboat across the lake as quick as possible. There are 10 oars in that rowboat. How many of them do you want to have row with you?
10.
10. I told you, a silly question.
Oh, 9.
But now imagine that team is seated around your conference table and you're trying to figure out the best way to get a new opportunity across the lake. In other words, to get it accomplished. If you're a leader whose paradigm is, my job is to tell them what to do, how many mental oars are in the water at that table?
1.
Yeah. But the leader who leads with questions, who leans forward, says, hey, gang, we have this opportunity. What do you all think we might do? How many mental oars potentially now are in the water?
Yeah. 10.
All of them.
Yeah.
And
Makes sense.
it's not
Yep.
a guarantee, Scott, but could it be that as you ask and you get responses from that whole team, that you might hear an idea you hadn't thought of? You might hear an idea better than anything you've
Uh,
thought of.
Oh, let me tell you, if I'm at the head of that table, there's guaranteed to be something that I haven't thought of, and a lot, many ideas that are better than mine.
And so let's just imagine there's a Joe around your table, and Joe shares a brilliant idea you hadn't thought of, and you say, Joe, that is incredible. Joe, would you lead our team in executing on that idea? How hard will Joe work?
Well, I would suggest, because Joe has ownership now, has stake in it. He's going to work extremely hard because
Yeah.
of those reasons, right? It's not something that's been slammed down his throat, but rather something he has, thought up of himself and wants to kind of prove himself and prove the rest of the team that, yeah, this makes sense. This can work.
And so, with that, Scott, I rest my case. That's part of why leading with questions is more effective. You get all the mental oars in the water. You may hear ideas better than yours. And now, when you ask them to execute on their ideas, they own the idea because it's theirs. They want it to be successful.
I feel like I just went through a coaching session in the past 5 minutes. No, Bob, it makes a lot of sense. I absolutely agree. I like how you framed it in the ownership aspect, getting our people to take ownership of problems, because we need that, right? We can't be the all singing, all dancing leader of everything. And we also need to keep thinking strategically and looking strategically. So that's a great
Yeah,
way. Now, obviously, I asked a lot of questions on the podcast, and I asked a lot of questions throughout the day. But for the leaders out there listening, what are some key components of effective questions for our subordinates? How can they ask effective questions? And I really would like to hone in on effective questions that inspire our team members, because a lot of leaders out there right now are having difficulty in that realm because a lot of people's morale is down. We have the great resignation that's still ongoing, still a lot of effects from the COVID-19 outbreak. Uh, they're talking about now potentially great recession again, so on and so forth. So, and not to mention the ongoing, unfortunately, the ongoing war in Ukraine. So, a lot
yeah.
of negative factors out there. So, inspiration, motivation, all those type of things. So, what are how do we ask great questions, and two, specifically, how can we ask great questions, inspire and motivate and uplift our team members?
Scott, a thought I want to share, and it's so basic and so simple. And I think some of the greatest leading with question type questions are so simple that they are not complicated. There's a quote from Henry David Thoreau that I absolutely love. He once said that the greatest compliment ever paid me was when one asked me what I thought and then attended to my answer. And so when you think of people reporting to you, instead of thinking, oh, what complicated, I'm going to have to really think hard to come up with a question, whatever the issues are on the table, just to say, gang, or one on one, Joe, what do you think we might do? Just that communicates to Joe, wow, my leader thinks I've got a brain. My leader values my input. My leader wants to hear what I think. And and it's like I say, it's so simple. Um, Scott, also when I'm speaking, I ask the audience who here would like to learn to lead with questions in 30 seconds. Well, every hand goes up because I say the reason I ask this is I often imagine from an audience that they'd like to learn to lead with questions, but they imagine they'll have to get a master's degree in questionology. Nice thought, but not practical. And so 30 seconds, wow. So, Scott, you're my only audience member right now. Uh, and I've asked you to come up on stage with me because I think you have a photographic memory. You only have to hear my 4 favorite questions once and you'll have them memorized. So, Scott, are you ready? Here we go.
Let's
Question
go.
number one. Question number one, what do you think? And it'd be about something. Number two, what else? Three, what else? Four, what else? Scott, do you have it memorized?
No, sorry. What else? What were we talking about?
I think you do.
Got it.
Now, some
Yeah.
folks say, but Bob, you can't ask what else, what else, what else. And I say, well, not in that rapid fashion. But when you ask, hey, what do you think about? They're going to give you that first answer. And when they pause, rather than just moving on, you just say, wow, Scott, that's good. What else? And Scott will give you more. And when he pauses again, instead of just moving on, I might say, Scott, wow, I'm now taking notes. I got my pen out. Please continue. What else? And I've discovered that you actually get to their gold nugget on the third and fourth question. And that in the past, even when I asked, what do you think? And they gave me that first answer and I moved on, I was a bit like that proverbial gold miner who mined all his life, quit. Somebody comes along later and discovers he's within 6 inches of the gold vein, but he never got there. And so often asking, what do you think? And then moving on, you're like that gold miner who didn't dig deep enough. Um, and again, you asked the question, what questions inspire? Let me go down another track for just a moment. And that is ask questions that they can respond to positively. Instead of, hey, how far are you behind on this project? Tell me about the progress you're making on this project. It lets them answer in a positive way. You get the answer to find out, but instead of them feeling threatened by the question, you get them to give you the positive response. And instead of, hey, what went wrong? What are you learning from this situation? And again, it creates that positiveness. So they say there is no such thing as a dumb question. I think there are questions that are better than others, especially when you want that question to motivate someone. Another little thing on positive questions. I never ask a person, why did you do that? Because when we ask the why question, it immediately creates a defensiveness. What's really fascinating to me, and I learned this from another person, is that if we ask what or how, it doesn't have that same feeling. So I observe you've done something, Scott. Instead of saying, Scott, why'd you do it that way? Scott, what led you to execute that in the way you did? It just feels different. And so I never ask a person, why did you do it? I ask them what or how. Now, let me also say, why can be a great question. I can ask Scott, why do you think Joe did that? You can ask that. Or why do you think in that situation such and such happened? You can ask that. Or Toyota came up with the 5 whys to get to the root of the problem. First, why did that happen? They give you an answer. Okay, why did that happen? Give you an answer. Why did that happen? By the time you've answered 5 times, you get to what the real problem was.
No, all of that. I can't disagree with a single thing there. I particularly like framing questions for the positive, response. Right, and it's really easy to go down that negative route. But as leaders, we can't get sucked into that negative route. Why? Because we just drive our morale down, right? Our people's morale down, and then output downwards as well, and it doesn't help anyone. So that's why, to me, framing those questions in a positive manner is so crucial. So definitely agree with that. And then the continuous question of why did that happen, or then what, etc.
Yeah.
Really helps dig deeper. In the military, we have a process where we go through our planning and we ask the question, so what? It drives us nuts. So what? So what? So what?
Yeah. Love it.
Right? You keep
Love it.
you keep asking that until you hit a certain point, right? Until you get down to the root factor or root cause or whatever. So that's the question that we keep asking is, so what? Which is effectively the same thing what you've said.
Scott,
Yep.
you just mentioned also morale, and that reminded me of true story here. U.S. Navy Captain Michael D. Ebershoff became commander of one of the U.S. Navy's modern warships, the USS Benfold.
Okay.
And when he took
Can you hit
command,
pause for a second?
yes,
Uh, so I've read his books. He was once lined up to come on the show. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it work out. And actually, his first book was given to me as what I thought was a gag gift for my brother, because my brother is actually in the Army as well as an enlisted NCO. I'm an officer, so and it was a book from a Navy officer. So I thought it was a gag gift for Christmas. But I will say for the listener out there, That is one of the best leadership books I've ever read. So there's my
Good.
my token, or my token for of gratitude, and I forget the word I'm looking for here. Anyway, carry on.
Well, when he took over command, the first thing he did to turn morale around on that ship is he had 300 15-minute interviews with 300 sailors on his ship. And he asked them three questions. And Scott, you'll have these memorized upon hearing them one time. Remember, some of the best questions are so simple. He asked those sailors, again, one on one in those interviews, what do you like best about this ship? Second question, what do you like least? Third question, what would you change if you could? And the captain listened. By the end of the first day, he might have only had time for 10 or 15 of these meetings. But there was already a buzz on the ship. The new captain's different. He actually cares what we think. And as he went through these interviews, it didn't take long for him to identify a whole bunch of things that needed to be changed. But Scott, since you've read the book, guess who he gave credit to when he started to announce changes? He
He
gave
gave credit
credit to the
to the people.
sailors. He
Yeah.
could have
He
easily taken credit for himself. I mean, so many of these things he could, what, we're going to fix that. I'm going to fix that today, and taking credit. But he's such a wise leader. Uh, and I forget the exact specifics, but when he took over, reenlistment rate was very, very low. By the time he was done, reenlistment rate on that ship, I think, was something like 85%. That alone saved the U.S. Navy millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah, I don't recall those stats. The interviews, though, I do recall quite well. He actually did them during lunch. He would sit with lunch with the sailors, which was also unheard of, and would have his chat with 2 to 3 of them during his lunchtime. And
Oh,
yeah, that's how he got through it. So it took him, I think, three
there's
months.
another, Scott, you may
Go ahead.
recall there's another thing he did. It didn't have to deal with questions, but he would write letters to parents of his sailors, thanking them for the great job their son was doing, or daughter, depending obviously on who he was writing about. And he came to this one particular sailor and he thought, he's not that good. Should I write a letter or shouldn't I? Well, he decided, I'll go ahead and write the letter. Well, they're on a ship, so it takes a little while, but one day that sailor appears at his door. Sir, permission to speak. Yes. He said, you sent a letter to my parents. He said, yes, I did. He said, sir, my parents called me after they got the letter. And for the first time in my life, my dad told me he was proud of me. Wow. Thank you, sir. He said that particular sailor became an incredible sailor. And just another way to affirm. And I thought, wow, so wise. You write a letter to mom and dad. Who are they going to call? They're going to call the son or daughter. They're going to say, got a letter from your captain. Really? What'd he say? And they're going to read it to him on the phone. What a great way to give a compliment to someone rather than directly. But I just love that story of how that motivated that young sailor to actually become a incredible sailor.
So I did the same thing from Michael's inspiration. I did the exact same thing when I commanded a squadron of 200 members, and I sent out 6 letters at the end of my tour duty with them. And one member basically same thing. Well, she was not, she was actually a rock star, uh, but what she came to my door, my office, and she informed me that her parents received a letter, and it was actually framed in their living room now.
Wow.
And she was like, they never really understood what I did until now. So for the
Wow.
leaders out there listening, I guess the moral of the story here is the question you ask yourself is, how can you recognize your people. And, could you, go ahead and write a letter and let them know the parents of your subordinates, or maybe the spouse, or maybe even the
Yes.
kids if they have older children, of what their son, daughter, spouse, father, mother, whoever, what they're doing, the impact that they're having, what they mean to the team, the organization, and so on and so forth. And I guarantee you that will be way more impactful than a organization banquet, team breakfast, a quick certificate slap on the back and a handshake. So this is didn't expect us to go down this route, Bob, but it's definitely been fantastic. Unfortunately, we're going to wind down here now, but before we wrap up, we've got a couple last questions for you. The first question is a question I ask all the guests here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, and that is, according to you, Bob Tiede, what makes a great leader?
Well, my definition over the year has changed. It used to be that they'd be the one with all the answers. And now I say a great leader is one who has some of the questions. And a great leader is one who understands that others on their team may have better ideas than they have. And so they lean forward and ask, what do you think? And affirm. And great leaders are learners. And because, we ask questions because we don't know the answer. And no one can know the answer to everything. So when a leader asks questions and actually makes people reporting to him his teacher or her teacher on that topic, they actually endear themselves. It's like they actually gain trust. We think sometimes, well, the only way I can have trust is to know it all. They see right through that. But when they see a leader who says, I don't know, but we need to find out, it's like, okay, I can relate to that leader, because all of us think to ourselves, I don't know everything either. And so, Scott, that would be my answer.
I enjoy that answer. That's a great answer, actually, and thoroughly fitting. And then the final question of the podcast: how can people find you? How can they follow you? Shameless plug. It's all about you now.
Well, Scott, everything I do on social media is free. But first, I'd be delighted for listeners to go to leadingwithquestions.com. Just run those three words together, leadingwithquestions.com. And on the bottom right, if you enter your email, you can subscribe to my blog. It's free, but you'll join leaders from 190 nations who are committed to growing their leadership effectiveness. And when you subscribe, every Monday and Thursday morning, well, U.S. time, Monday and Thursday morning, into your inbox will come what I call some turnkey ready questions that you can turn right around to use to ask your superior, your colleagues, your staff, your clients, your prospects, your friends or family. And then also, I've written 5 books, and they're available in multiple languages. But if you go to leadingwithquestions.com, at the top, one of the icons you can click on is just books. And that'll take you to the page with all the books. And there again, if you enter your email, you'll be given instant access to download and save on your device 1, 2, 3, 4, or all 5. And 2 of them are also audiobooks, free MP3, like your podcast. They can download and listen to those as they walk, run, drive, bike, whatever, even if they want to sit in the rocking chair and listen. But thank you, Scott.
Thank you to Bob. And for the listeners, always, it's easy. What you can do is just open up the show notes section of your podcasting app, scroll to the bottom, and the link is right there at the bottom for you always. So check that out. Bob, again, thanks for your time. Thanks for coming out and speaking to the audience and talk about this ever important topic, yet so simple. Questions. And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that. Help me, help a friend, win-win all around. And hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.